I'm Brian Foster, and this is the Grindhouse Institute. On each episode of this podcast, Jeremy Floyd and I program a triple feature movie night. Each of the movies share common themes, and we discuss them here. We're happy you could join us for today's block we call Chloé Zhao's America. Born in Beijing in 1982, director, writer, editor, producer Chloé Zhao has firmly established herself as an indie darling. Her first two films have won critical praise among film festival crowds, and her third, most recent film is winning critical praise left and right from mainstream crowds as well. Zhao's films share a consistent visual and emotional quality. Her style is a unique mixture of both documentary and narrative filmmaking. Utilizing a mixture of professional actors and the real people who she lived with during her time living on the Pine Ridge Reservation, Zhao is able to see America with fresh eyes, and what she finds aren't the usual American stories. When his absentee father dies, Johnny does what he can to provide for his mother and sister. Dealing with the harsh realities of living on the res, Johnny must make the difficult decision to stay and take care of his family or pursue his dreams of heading west. Starring John Reddy and Jay Sean St. John in Zhao's debut feature film, 2015's Songs My Brothers Taught Me. Determined to get back to the rodeo after suffering a near-fatal head wound from a bucking bronco, Brady Blackburn struggles with the possibility that his riding days are over. Feeling pressure from his family and the local community, Brady will need to make the choice to get back on the horse or come to the realization that his skills may be better suited on the ground. Brady, Wayne, and Lily Jandreau star in 2017's The Rider. Following the closure of the U.S. gypsum plant in Empire, Nevada, and the subsequent dissolving of her town's existence, Fern decides to sell most of her belongings and live houseless as a nomad. With the mentorship of others who almost learned to survive a post-recession life on the road, Fern must choose whether to continue living in her van or settle back into a life under a roof. Frances McDormand and a collection of real-life nomads star in 2020's Nomadland. Thank you for listening to the Grindhouse Institute. Please enjoy.
We are him and he is us. We're all one in this together. Dakyase. Mitaku ye oyase.
Welcome back to the Grindhouse Institute. I'm Brian Foster. With me as always is Jeremy Floyd. Hello, and how are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Very, very good. Today we have another very special episode, as well as a very special returning guest.
Yeah.
Jeremy, would you like to do the intro?
Yeah. Had been discussing some of today's movies with our returning champion, and decided that I think this would be a good way to explore, that sort of third-party view of American culture. And to help us go through all this, Daniel Ross.
Hey guys, thanks
Welcome.
for having me back.
For sure, yeah.
Looking for my challenge coin in the mail.
Yeah, we got to mail some of those out.
Exactly.
This is a fantastic block. The most recent film block that we've ever done on this show. We actually have a movie from last year, 2020, and within the last 5 years or 6 years. So these are actual recent films.
I guess it technically debuted in 2020, Nomadland, but I don't think anyone got to really. Most people didn't get to see it, I think, till 2021, right? So it's
on Hulu now. Yeah,
that makes it the most recent. I mean, because we did do The Hunt.
Yeah, but this one technically is this year, so we're very recent on this one. These are films by director, writer, editor Chloé Zhao. She is getting some major accolades right now, specifically as a Best Picture and Best Director at the Golden Globes. Mm-hmm. And now she's got about 6 noms, I think, for this movie for the Academy Awards. Dan, I think you came up with this block. I'd love for you to introduce it, if you don't mind.
Sure. I'll just add to the player stats. I think Chloé is now the most decorated filmmaker in a calendar year, surpassing Alexander Payne for Sideways.
Well,
we'll have to fact check that one, but I think she's going to be building some trophy cases.
Absolutely.
I think this film block was interesting. I'm not sure if it was my idea. I think it might have been Jeremy's idea, but it's probably born of an ongoing conversation he and I have been having over time about what an outsider's perspective is when they embed themselves somewhere sort of deeply inside. And I think, all three of these films really, are prime examples of communities that, are of course overlooked in our society, but also require real work for somebody on the outside to access authentically. And, Chloe has made a career now of doing that. And, for me, I think escalating success over three of her features.
I agree. And what are those features, if you don't mind?
We've got the first one, Songs My Brother Taught Me, which came out in 2016, followed by The Rider, which was, 2018?
2017, I have.
2017 or 18, depending on
Release
how you count film festival release dates. Yeah,
that's right. And then, of course, this year's odds-on favorite for Best Picture, Nomadland.
Yeah.
Fantastic films all around. Definitely a style that she brings, something very unique to her. I know that other directors do similar things, but like you said, surrounding yourself by the real people that you're focusing on, even in a film, like a movie like The Rider, these people were the real people based on the story, playing fictional characters. This was just really interesting. I watched Nomadland first of the three, and then went to Songs My Brothers Taught Me, and then The Rider. But Nomadland absolutely blew me away, and I agree that this is a front runner for Best Picture for sure.
Yeah, it's funny. I ended up watching it in that same order that you did, although I had seen The Rider before. I mean, and I think this kind of came out of a conversation that Daniel and I were having. I was like, kind of, more or less about Nomadland. He had seen it and liked it, and then I had seen The Rider, and I basically, I'd heard this interview with Chloé Zhao around the time that The Rider came out, and she was talking about like this interesting experience of like shooting Songs My Brothers Taught Me, and then getting introduced to Brady, whose real name is not Blackburn, but Jan Drow.
Same first name though, right? Still Brady. Yeah.
Yeah. It's easy for me to say. And it sounded interesting. It was like this interesting blend of sort of documentary and sort of dramatic film. And I think in all three of these, she kind of rides that line the whole time, but knows sort of when to be dramatic and when to be authentic. Or I think, the way she was kind of putting it, which made it sound interesting to me, was like finding a way to have things feel authentic and real, and then, find the poetry in those things, and kind of, blending those things the way that she does so successfully in all three of these. And I think the interesting part is that, like, unlike maybe, Wong Kar-wai or Terrence Malick, which I feel like, she has some she owes some debt to, right? She's definitely influenced by these guys.
We're gonna have to get a time code check on how quickly we mentioned Terrence Malick in this conversation.
I'm at 7:38 right now. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Definite inspiration there.
No, totally. But but the way that she grounds her films differently than Malick, who doesn't ground them at all. You know what I mean? It's like, his is sort of like pure extended poetry, and hers definitely has that sort of, documentarian's point of view on certain things, which is another reason, I kind of wanted to, Daniel, loop you into this, that's kind of your world as well. But, just also this idea that we were talking about with the outsider's perspective on American life, and then these subcultures that she focuses on in all three of these films. It was something that we had touched on a little bit when we did our Christmas noir episode, where it's like a lot of film noirs kind of had that as well. Like, there's this different gaze, kind of a critical gaze, and, kind of a different attitude and everything that one gets when you're able to look at something from the outside, and it's not being weighed down with maybe the baggage of, like American exceptionalism and all these other things, right? And she's able to kind of like see and sort of cut through some of that stuff, perhaps because of that point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the things, and I want to get to that point, but one thing you mentioned earlier was the blend of documentary and scripted. And for me, I think there's so much in the aesthetic realm to talk about with Zhao's films. And that's something that for me is one of the underwhelming dimensions of sort of the modern cinema, if you will. There isn't a whole lot to talk about, or at least not a whole lot interesting. But starting with the performances she gets from her actors in all three of these, it's amazing. It was amazing to me how strong the performances were, particularly from the non-professional actors. And you may say, oh, well, they're just playing themselves, or, it's drawn from real life. But, for anybody who's tried to read a line of dialogue, I mean, it's incredibly difficult. And it was almost as though she had me fooled, where I was like, man, directing must be real easy. I mean, she just got these people together, and they're just effortlessly bringing this pathos and authenticity and, depth of character, even and especially when they're not delivering a line, Yeah, exactly.
Like that's the part that, like, I mean, it's even hard for established actors to do, is to have that be able to read something on their face when they're not saying something, right? It's like, and it's incredible how much she relies on that with all of these movies, actually, with some of the sort of the non-Frances McDormand level actors, you know what I mean? And that's even something that's sort of beyond, like, Brian, the other day we were talking about how Martin Scorsese is able to pull some of that stuff out of these non-actors and give that authenticity of what that little Italy neighborhood in the 60s or
the real
50s
neighborhood guys
used to feel like, or and you get the like the Tootie character in Goodfellas, and he feels very authentic, but like that character was also not being asked to relay these like underlying emotions in their face without saying anything. His were mostly like, I gotta toughen this fucking kid up or whatever, like that kind of shit.
Wasted all the aprons on it.
8 fucking aprons on this guy. You're a real jerk, Henry. But like for the folks at home, he's pointing a stubby finger.
And I had a cigar too.
Yeah. No, but it's like It's one thing to be able to like have that sort of regional neighborhood accent and kind of like that way of speaking and it's sort of like the poetry of the streets in that sense. And it's another to have people like all the actors essentially in songs My Brothers Taught Me, the mother, like the little the I don't know how old she was, like 11-year-old girl in it, the sort of main guy, like all of them. We're able to sell a lot of a performance without saying anything, right? It's like, and that's the harder of the things to do, because if you can wind up Martin Scorsese's mom to react to someone cursing, and her sort of natural reaction is to like again with the cursing, and all that stuff, right? But it's a different level of being able to coax something out of somebody. To have them be able to express something internal inside them without saying anything, and when they're not actually feeling that, right? It's like, and then for non-actors, it's like an incredible feat.
But she had Johnny, the lead character of Songs My Brothers Taught Me. She had Johnny all over, and he was a bootlegger, he was a boxer or an aspiring boxer. She had him doing so many different things. And for a first movie out the door to be directing, again, non-actors, to be doing all of these acting things in different areas, I think they nailed it in every piece. And his sister, also amazing. That fella Travis, the number 7 Travis, I call him.
Oh, right.
Like clearly, he's been through some stuff, and there's something behind what he's saying that's real. And I think that goes across everything. The fact that, Brady and Lily and Wayne from The Rider, they were a real family.
Yeah.
That's his sister, that's his father, and the fact that them as a family were able to portray themselves together on screen too, I think that really shined, in my opinion. That was my favorite of the three, to be honest. It hit me the hardest, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, and that was a little more next level, acting wise than Songs My Brothers Taught Me. But you're right. I mean, it's, even though they're playing themselves and whatever, and it in theory sounds like something that would be easier to do than playing someone who's very much unlike you. But it's different when they're like, hey, why don't you yell at your dad real quick, or like start crying about your buddy who's had been in this terrible accident or whatever.
Lane, yeah.
And it's something that you really got to sort of applaud Chloe for being able to create that space and be able to coax those things out of everybody. Especially
with the youth of many of the people in her cast. Jay Sean in Songs My Brothers Taught Me, so young. And I think about films featuring children by, the so-called masters. The one that came to mind immediately, I think, because I watched it somewhat recently, is Francis Ford Coppola's Life Without Zoe from New York Stories, and god awful the whole thing is abysmal, but in particular, not a single line out of the mouths of those children is believable, is poignant. It really is like a school play put on really expensive film stock, whereas this, just the level of mastery here is quite something.
Yeah, and it's seeing some behind the scenes. I only watched the behind the scenes of Nomadland, but the crew that she's with is very small. She's got her operator / cinematographer with her. They're capturing this stuff. A lot of it being natural light that he's capturing, but still maintaining like an ultra cinematic look, still feeling documentary. And I think that he should also be applauded for what he's delivering, as well as the fact that she's editing this and finding these moments and bringing it all together.
One thing on that, I think, that this, again, the blend of documentary, scripted, I think that the patience and time that she clearly spends in the world and with the people of the world in order to achieve the authenticity is very much from that documentary world, where you may hang out with the people in your film for years before you even bring the camera along.
The second film came from her meeting people during the filming of the first one, and they were all part of that same Pine Ridge reservation in the Dakotas, right? South Dakota. Yep. And Brady and those people, I think, were part of that same, overall community. And she extended that as, in many ways, somewhat of a sequel or an extension of like that area that she's focusing on. I thought that was very interesting looking back in some of the facts of the movies. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. Like it feels like a sequel in a way. It's like, okay, it's the Indian reservations and like the life in the Badlands there. But Songs My Brothers Taught Me was definitely more like a day in the life on the res, and then The Rider was much more about sort of that sort of cowboy, rodeo life. But it is interesting because it's like in a way you'd think, oh man, that's going to be kind of a rehash of the first one, but a different main character. But she also manages to kind of have it feel just so different.
Similar closures, though, I'd say, and in terms of the flow between. So Songs My Brothers Taught Me, Johnny decided not to leave the res and decided to stay with his sister, and then Brady decided not to get back on the horse, right? He decided that he was just going to be with his family, and it was kind of two similar endings which I thought were great closures for these. But I feel like I had the impression before seeing these that these were going to be ultra depressing, like movies that I was just going to be like in tears the whole time. I'm going to admit it happened a couple times, but it wasn't like they were ultra depressing. They actually ended with quite a bit of hope. And I loved how, and even Nomadland ended, Fern decided not to go to the home lifestyle anymore. She decided to stay on the road and continue her seasonal journey of Amazon fulfillment centers and beetroot plants and all that. But, she decided not to be with David, and I thought that they all had a very similar ending or a similar conclusion.
Yeah. The beat thing was so nuts. I had to read what that was. Or maybe they said it and I missed it, but I was like, what the hell is she unloading on that thing? It looks so nuts.
And she was working.
And there's so much huge heavy machinery around there. You're just like, oh, is this like a mining operation? Like, what is this thing?
Yeah.
You have to mine. You have to mine beats. A long tradition of beat miners.
Yeah.
Ding 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 ding.
Red lung from being in those beat mines.
I want to go back to the writer on that note, Brian. One thing I was reading a Vogue profile of her, and something one of her film teachers from NYU said of her, I just loved, which was paraphrasing this: Chloe has a warm heart and a cold eye. And I think that is a great distillation of how these films feel aesthetically and emotionally. In the writer, I love that turnabout you talk about, because the sort of the driving tension, apart from the sort of social systemic issues of their life, is whether or not he's going to join Aurelia as she goes, presumably to UCLA or something for college. And I think there's this feeling of dread about him going, at least for me, this this is just not, if you go, it is just absolutely not going to work out for you. She's off to become a lawyer. Especially since
you're seeing how much sort of support and, sort of cultural, acceptance and everything else that he has there, and community and everything else. And you think about what it's like to just to move to LA or whatever. I mean,
Right.
I mean, his family asked, right? Or do you have a plan? Do you have a strategy, a job lined up? No, and I think that all kind of was a realization for him, right?
Exactly, and not to mention just the sort of forces aligned against relationships at that age, when
exactly
young couples making it through college. Just, what are the the percentages of those who stick through it. So yeah, it's just clearly this kind of doomed plan. And yet, on a surface level, it's almost set up in a way as though, well, if he doesn't achieve that goal of joining her, that's the failure. But in fact, I think the turnabout is the success of this mature decision he makes. Not necessarily out of fear, because it really took sacrifice for him to let her go, and recognize the value he has with his family and responsibility to his sister. So yeah, I found that
wayward mom as well. Yeah,
right. It wasn't depressing that he didn't join her, that he failed to make that sort of classic journey west, but in fact, hopeful, affirming.
And punctuated by Jay Sean's smile at the end, and again, one of these moments where you're not an actor, but you sold me completely. I got goosebumps talking about it. It's a beautiful, beautiful scene. Brilliant.
No, absolutely. And I think you're right to point out sort of the way it could have ended in all these cases as much more despairing.
I thought he was going to get killed by bootleggers. I thought that there was a route where he was going to go to prison, right? They were going to, maybe send him to jail or something. It could have gone bad.
I think that quality is particularly present in the writer. You know what I mean? It's the writer could have been a wrestler. You know what I mean? It's
Well, they set it up with Lane, his friend Lane, and that was kind of, I thought that was going to be the foreshadowing for where he was going to end up. But, instead he made that decision. But those scenes with Lane those were hard. I'm having a hard time talking about them. Those were hard.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, everything about, all three of these movies is pretty heart-wrenching.
Yeah.
But that cold eye you were talking about, where it's the warm heart, cold eye is such a perfect way to describe it. It's a little like the way, Brian, we had talked about a couple weeks ago with Goodfellas, where we see Ray Liotta walk across the street and fuck up his neighbor, and because there was sort of no coverage, and because it was just sort of this very raw and unvarnished handheld moment, it sort of like amps up the drama in a way that you wouldn't perhaps think to do on first glance. Because it feels raw, because you can't get that close up, because you can't like create that artificial moment, and because of that, sometimes you can overdo the drama. And she finds this way to like sort of undersell some of these moments, which makes them stronger.
I find her kind of a master of contrast. And in The Rider, one of my favorite contrasts was the ostensible excitement of the rodeo, that 8 seconds of chaos and skill and possibility of death, which you would think would be like the most exciting thing to watch and the most amazing demonstration of a cowboy's skill. But then there's that scene where he breaks the horse after his injury.
Oh, good boy. You didn't even know you did that, did you? Good boy, you just led.
And the like finesse and sort of like soulful skill that he has to bring, just this kind of like transcendent ability he has is so much more impressive and, for me, exciting than watching somebody rattle on top of a horse.
Completely agree. Did you see he never lost eyes with the horse? He would never look away. That horse and he were just like locked in lockstep, if you will, which eventually they actually were. But that horse scene, that was Apollo, right? Was that? Or no, I'm sorry. The other horse that they broke was that other gentleman's horse. But Apollo, eventually he had to, he owned Apollo. Seeing he had to put down Apollo, or actually ask his father to do so, that was hard. Especially after seeing how he managed the first horse, a bucking mare, if they call him, or a wild mare, and they bring him back down to like this docile animal that'll let you sit on their back. And it kind of brings up like all these questions, like, should we be doing this? It was still quite brilliant to watch him communicate with this thing with, again, like no real words, just kind of just being present.
I think that was actual. I think he was really doing that.
It had to be there. Yeah, I don't.
Well, and that's what he apparently does, in real life now. That the real Brady,
which seems also incredibly dangerous and easy way to get your soft-boiled head kicked in.
Yeah.
Man, that scar that they show at the beginning of the film, and
such good special effects.
Him pulling out those, him pulling out those staples and all that, and wrapping his head in the cellophane. I mean, it was hard. It's hard to watch, but it was a great intro.
Yeah, I've had the misfortune of getting my head stapled a few times. Never as severe as Brady, but that's not the way you pull them out, for sure. Just ripping them out with your fingers
with a knife.
Yeah, like plucking them out.
Not recommended.
Yeah, it's like I had to use a claw hammer to pull them out.
Yeah.
What's fascinating about that sort of poetic moment, and the poetic punctuation, I think, of the writer, and having him sort of break those horses, and like, you're seeing him make those connections and all this stuff, and you're just kind of like, you're there inside of that moment, like witnessing something that you normally don't witness. And she's so great at doing that, both sort of in this style, which is documentary, and then maybe even songs my brothers taught me when they're having sex. Oh my God, what's his name? John Reddy and his girlfriend. Where it feels like, like, oh boy, we shouldn't be here. Like this camera, it's like, this is like, it's too intimate. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But there's something, especially in The Rider, during some of those horse breaking scenes, where you feel like in the sort of Wong Kar-wai version or the Terrence Malick version of those moments, we'd be getting a lot more voiceover and a lot more sort of direct poetry, pumped into our heads. But this one, kind of allows that cold eye that you're talking about, to sort of like allow us to, like be inside that space with him, and again, it's wild that how well she's able to sort of communicate those things, especially without professional actors.
And I feel more informed about these subcultures now. She covered enough of it in like that documentary educational way that with also including that theatrical feel. I really enjoyed the Nomads. The main fella from the Nomads, that Bob Wells guy, he was just, I kind of wanted to, pack up the house here and get in a van and start heading out to
attend a lecture.
Yeah, exactly. Go check out a lecture. Yeah.
Before we get to Nomadland, to just on that point, Jeremy, about sort of the way Malick or Wong Kar-wai might approach this material, I think interestingly in Songs My Brothers Taught Me and the Rider, there are a couple of moments where I think like she might have lost that coldness a bit and indulged, and for me were sort of weaker moments, in particular with Songs, the opening scene where there is voiceover and it's a bit on the nose. He says, you got to leave something wild in a horse, again, paraphrasing. And I felt like, there was a bit of like pulling the subtext out and just sort of leaving it there on the surface. And then similarly in The Rider, after they have to put down Apollo, I think what's so poignant in that scene is he's looking at the barbed wire wrapped around Apollo's leg, and it looks like the same scar on his scalp, and he's recognizing like, I'm going to have to kill you. You're finished. In a way, I'm finished too. There's been a death here in me. I'm going to live, but something's died.
No, he puts it even worse. It's like, he's like, because I'm a human, I have to continue.
I have to,
or something.
Yeah, and
I
for
have
me,
to
I
live,
wish,
right? Yeah.
I kind of wish he hadn't. Like, I liked sort of just getting that, watching the connection between him and Apollo, and then not having him say that.
But that moment was to try to set up, his absolute need to try and get back on the Bronco for the last moment, which then he buckles with his like conviction to do that, simply because his like family shows up there, and I don't know, like that part, like, and it also like, gives something that like maybe the wrestler didn't have, which is like something to live for.
Oh, right.
I mean, like with that character, he was very much at the end of his rope. And so like, but then there's also this idea that Aronofsky likes to explore. I mean, what's it called? Black Swan was the same thing, where it was like, that there's something sort of noble about just dying for your art. Sort of literally dying for your art.
I mean, if Brady followed through with some of those cowboys that were egging him on a bit, he would have died for his art.
No,
I mean, those guys,
exactly.
like grit your teeth and get back up on the horse is basically how these guys were, you know? Like, ribs are a little bit different than the brain being damaged, man, Yeah.
Cowboy up.
Yeah, cowboy up.
Cowboy
That's
up.
what, yeah.
It's all the same to a cowboy. Ride through the pain.
I found what was beautiful about The Rider. I sort of invented this, I was doing fanfic by the end of it, where what was hopeful for me was that, the arc of this character is, as Chloé Zhao put it in an interview, he sort of loses his superpower, and he has this unbelievable skill that he's just unable to put to use. It could kill him. But the
torture.
The thing that he has inside actually is his ability to connect with another being, and ultimately the relationship with Lane. It's almost like the sort of fanfic. I'm inventing his like future career as a physical therapist. Like it's just like you're realizing like, oh, this guy, he's got this kind of classic stoic American male exterior, but there's something in him that others just respond to, and that's exactly what a healer and a caretaker is at heart, and he has it. You just see it with Lane. Like, he's going to be okay.
Well, and his sister, I mean, and, in a way, his sort of, his fuck up dad that he doesn't want to be, and all this stuff, like the sort of gambling and drinking part of it. And you're right, like, it's like the title should have been The Healer or something, it's like, because that's sort of like the thing that he has inside him. And I think he maybe misdiagnosed or like misunderstood what his gifts are. Which is that like he thinks that he was put on this earth to be the rodeo champion or whatever, but it's that he is there to like be that healer or that sort of connector, both with sort of the horses and then the physical therapy. You're saying with his friend and everything.
And going back to, again, sort of studies in contrast, the contrast between him and Lane, his best friend. Lane is this sort of like rock star bull rider, throwing up the devil's horns after he gets off a crazy bull. And, Brady is sort of this like cerebral, kind of introverted, quiet master of his craft. And, you see it almost as though like there's something about his gentleness that kind of saves him from going down that path. Like the bombast gets Lane.
Yeah, I mean he's fighting it the whole time, but then you're right, like that he can't break free of that piece of his nature, that the sort of the compassionate side and the empathetic side.
Mm-hmm. One thing, kind of just switching gears, just to note with going back to the whole concept here of outsider looking in, she's doing it from so many different layers. First as somebody from China in America, into these communities like the Pine Ridge Reservation, but then again with gender in these first two films, her, being a woman telling the story of these, masculine men, these rugged men, there's that also that great contrast and that way that she's able to look in from the outside and find the familiar in the unfamiliar and bring out something that feels so fresh. I think, and in a lot of the reviews of her work, the critics will reference sort of where her films fit in the canon of Westerns and how she's in a way kind of reinvented the Western, particularly with The Rider, and how it feels so fresh compared to, a genre that maybe at this point exhausted, right? And every once in a while, somebody will come along that can just like pull out something you didn't know was in there, right? And I think, it does take that sort of outside perspective sometimes to do that.
It's interesting. Like in one of the interviews I saw that she and her cinematographer Joshua James Richards gave, talked about how apparently Joshua was the one who wanted to like insert all of these like sort of nods to Western cinema, or the Western as a genre. And for her that wasn't really like something she was interested in or whatever. She wasn't the one trying to make those illusions. Obviously they're there, but I think it's kind of brought by her longtime collaborator and her cinematographer.
So it happened naturally. I mean, in camera, just the fact of where they were, who they were talking to.
It's like he would be the one to set up the searcher shot, and all these things. Like so, but then also like the sort of the magisterial landscape,
right?
And the sort of like that awe that's inspired, in a lot of John Ford films and everything else about the land itself. I'm sure that came from just being there, but also, I guess her cinematographer was sort of more well versed in that sort of genre and everything else. One quick last thing before we kind of move on to Nomadland, which we kind of haven't touched on just yet, but like, so I'd seen The Rider before. It was great watching it again. I was kind of worried that it was like going to be one of those movies that's going to be hard to revisit. Or like, okay, well, since I know what happens, or like the sort of suspense of like, is he going to kill himself for his art? Is it going to work out, or like have something that like allows for sort of the rewatchability, right? Sometimes it's like there's a movie that's like it's good, but there's like no reason to come back to
right.
it. Luckily, for me, like the Rider, it wasn't that case. But anyway, I the thing I wanted to talk about a little bit was like in Songs My Brothers Taught Me, like they had so many like great lines that had that poetry, and I think part of it could be Danny, for your taste, maybe a little too on the nose or something, but like just some of those great moments with like the oh my god, I can't remember that the brother that's in prison. He talks to his mom and she's like telling him how she found God and all this stuff, and he's like, hey, don't make God another man you abandon your children for. And it's like okay, perhaps a little on the nose, but it is so raw that there's something just like so sort of beautiful and poetic and sort of it says so much about this character and then about the relationship between those two characters, being able to just distill it down to a line like that.
Yeah, and I wasn't 100% clear what the beef was between them two, because she said that he doesn't want to see me. She mentioned that earlier when when she was talking, but then he came out with that, and I do agree that it's kind of like this is what it is. I'm going to say this out loud, but I think it was needed because you knew that something was going on between them. This solidified what that was.
No, exactly, and allowed you.
And I thought it was a really good line.
Yeah, well, that too.
Yeah,
but also allowed you to kind of be in on the joke, be in on what they're experiencing.
I've been going to church. I've been going a lot. It really helps.
Just don't make God another man that you abandoned your children for.
And the other quick thing I wanted to bring up was another really poignant moment was. We keep seeing this guy who's obsessed with the number 7, the tatted up face,
Travis,
the Tekashi 6ix9ine, esque guy, and when he kind of gives her that speech about why are you obsessed with 7, and it's like, okay, well, it's something about it's in the Bible and all this stuff, but there's also this idea of how Crazy Horse said that everything ended at Wounded Knee, but it would begin again in the 7th generation. That's you.
Yeah. I got it written down
awesome.
Word for word. I was reading it as you were saying. I had to write that one down. Yeah. He was my favorite character in that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or a real person, I should say.
But it gives voice to something that is sort of underlying in all the themes in what's happening in the just kind of percolating in the background. I mean, ostensibly the movie's about do I leave home and go on this adventure with my high school sweetheart? That poignant scene where it's just everyone's in the classroom. What do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to do when you get out of high school? And everyone has these
is he hungover?
Right, exactly. And ostensibly it's about do I leave home is the question, right? But, there's all this sort of, percolating, sort of Americana and, sort of that culture and that history, but it's all sort of just percolating mostly under the surface because we're focused on this kitchen sink drama. But it's not all subtext and it's not all in the background because we do get some of that. And that's what that, speech kind of was able to bring out of it.
I think we should probably talk about Nomadland a bit.
No way.
There's so much to say about this one too. It's just
so interesting because we're talking about kind of on the nose things. I mean, this does open with a setup of exactly what the background is of this story. Mm-hmm. This U.S. gypsum plant in Empire, Nevada is shut down, which basically shuts down the entire town. The zip code is no longer exists anymore. That was one of the hardest things I've ever read. I'm like, wait, is this real? This is real. The zip code has been erased. And this woman Fern, who in this instance is a well-established actor, Frances McDormand, which is different from these other films. But she chooses to live in a van, chooses to follow Linda May, her friend, to go meet Bob Wells, and become a nomad. Again, something I've heard of and something I know about, similar to these other films, but this kind of brought me on that journey, and now I feel like I'm so much more informed.
Well, it's interesting, you brought up the Frances McDormand thing. I mean, obviously David Strathairn is also in it.
Exactly.
He was great. But it's funny because this Frances McDormand, it's okay, I kind of, just from seeing the poster or whatever, I was kind of thinking that it would be more or less the character she played in 3 Billboards or whatever. Mm-hmm. But, definitely got into some of that, writer, very, just very naked, very raw, very, warts and all performance. And no frills the way that, 3 Billboards, had, a lot of, quippy, moments and a lot of artifice in that way that this one, very much stripped out.
And I would say in most of the scenes with her and the real nomads, I think she let them take center stage more than herself. And I think that, her support really brought them forward because they're the ones that had the information, right? And Swanky, she was such a sweet woman. Like, she only had a few months to live, and she was, she was kind of a mentor to Fern, teaching her, you're gonna blow a tire out here in the middle of nowhere. You're gonna die. Like, that's how it is. Yeah. You need to, toughen up, learn how this works.
Right, and she was doing everything with that broken arm, and then
her story about going to the ocean,
not to
and
mention
seeing
the brain tumor,
seeing the birds flying above and below her, that she felt like she was flying because she saw the reflection in the water. And then sending that video over the phone, and it all paid off. Oh my god. Yeah. Brilliant stuff. Like, beautiful.
This one had me levitating on my couch from the first frame. Just going back to the that title card about Empire, Nevada. I mean, just Empire, right? Like that alone. As we watch this film in a time when I think most of us feel like the Empire's over. Like we're in an empire that is finished. Kind of Walking Dead zombie in a lot of ways. And so to have that sort of embodied in this town, that it had a golf course and a swimming pool,
right,
and it was all
sounds
of these
nice.
things. Like, sounds great. And it's just that sort of emblem of 20th century America. This, the height of labor and its strength, and all of the fruits and standard of living that it raised for millions of people. And now we're looking at that in the rearview mirror, just as this town is shut down.
Fully dependent on one business to survive.
Exactly. Right. Incredible.
So it's like, you're so right about the, the irony of it being called Empire, Nevada.
Yeah.
The sort of 21st century, like the whole movie, it's just like this, scraped out, hollowed out, like, when she's going through her old tract housing and just how empty and dead it sounds, like, none of the electricity is hooked up, none of the water's hooked up, no one's around. It's like, that's what the whole movie just felt like, scooped out from the middle.
Yeah.
And you're right. Like, there's that feeling of that, the Empire is dead, but still, rolling along with inertia.
Yeah.
It hasn't realized it yet, type of thing. And that's what everyone in the nomad world very much felt like. It was like, everyone was going around the campfire telling their stories about, how they were all sort of promised this American dream, and this is what is left.
The way she describes that house, and the payoff in that, we're jumping way ahead.
Totally.
Spoiler alert, but
no.
Actually, maybe we should mention that.
This is a spoiler. We can actually spoiler alert.
Like a movie that's not 40 or 60 years old.
Please, Jen. Yeah, that definitely.
Yeah, right. So what does she say? How does she describe it? She's describing that amazing vista, which
nothing was in their way.
There's nothing in our way. And that is just like in the past tense.
Right.
And now everything is in the way. Everything, from a flat tire to
no heat,
a guy knocking on your door telling you can't sleep here, even though it's an empty parking lot in a barren wasteland.
Yeah,
right.
Everything's in the way.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think not only was I kind of excited to have you on to talk about some of this documentary part of it, this like outsider's view on sort of the American dream and like the American society, but also I think there's this one had to kind of hit home for you, Danny, a little bit more because your dad was doing this for a while, like I mean now under different circumstances and by choice, rolling around in the RV, and not because it was just like last ditch at staying alive type of thing.
Exactly, yeah, definitely fully elective and emphasis on the R in RV, the recreational vehicle. But certainly he's somebody who's aware of Bob Wells and spends time at that RV camp in Quartzsite. I've been through Quartzsite myself a million times because my grandparents lived in Arizona as a kid, and we'd drive the 6-hour drive through the Mojave Desert to Phoenix, and so I have vivid memories of that location, and it's beautiful. And as a kid, I remember just being completely bored by the desert scenery, and
you didn't find the same beauty that that Chloe and Joshua Richards did?
Not as a 9-year-old, but of course now
you're like, where's the Mario Kart? Yeah, exactly.
Right, like that setting, the community there. I mean, it has. This is something that's interesting, and it will lead to something that I do want to talk about, which is some criticism of this film. I feel like Zhao never really romanticizes the experience. She dignifies it.
Sure.
Which
she does with everything. It's like I think real quick. I'm sorry to throw you off a little bit, but like
go for it.
That's a really good point. I'm gonna forget if we don't talk about it now. But like she does that so well with all these movies, right? Like there's not too much poverty fetishization in all three of these. There's not too much sort of judgment or feeling terrible for these poor people. But she also imbues a lot of these things with a lot of dignity.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really, really great way to put it. And I think it, not only is it in Nomadland, but in all three of these films.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you can find. I think the complexity of it is what's so great. You find those moments of value, and there is an aspirational element to what these nomads are doing. The freedom, being on the road, finding community. But because all of it is, always overshadowed by the larger forces that have put them in that position, it's never, it's never a vacation. It's never a journey of, it's not eat, pray, love. It's it.
Well, it and it's kind of like embodied with that scene where it's like, well, I mean, your van's only worth like $5,000. I'd say just go ahead and invest in something else, right? And she's like, no, you don't understand. It's my home. You know what I mean? That's like, when you're not given that offer of the recreation. I mean, obviously, we've been camping together, and it's like it's a lot of fun, going to some of those sites and everything else. But there's also this idea of doing that for the recreation part.
Yep.
And not having that be your life.
Can't wait for my hot shower.
By force. Yeah.
So what has your dad just hung with the Bob Wells crew and done that like for like a season or a few seasons, or how did that work?
I don't know. I'll have to ask him if he's ever spent time. I think he's just, because he has an RV, he's probably been on YouTube looking for. Bob has a YouTube channel where he gives people tips. He sort of does. I think that's how he makes his living. He's really popular. So yeah, my dad they drive around, living in their nice RV. It's sort of the Lux life, not scratching out an existence.
Kind of like when Fern and Linda May were checking out those the
washer
really
dryer?
high,
not that high end, but
those things must have been a couple $100,000. Yeah, they were nice.
They have a bathroom and a shower in their vehicles. So.
That seems a lot better than what Fern had.
Than the 5-gallon, or if you got bad knees, the 7-gallon.
Nobody's shitting in a bucket. Yeah. So, one thing that I wanted to bring up is we're having this conversation as we're waiting for the votes to be tallied at the Bessemer Fulfillment Center, the Amazon Fulfillment Center. And there's this union drive happening there. And I think a lot of us are on pins and needles waiting to see the outcome of that. And maybe it's already come in. I'll have to check the news. But one of the criticisms of this film is the role that Amazon plays. And in particular, the way the film portrays the experience of working at Amazon. There's a conspicuous lack of people pissing in bottles,
right,
for fear of being fired for taking a bathroom break. There's a suspicious lack of just the misery that so many people, including people in the film, Linda May, who I think is quoted in the book that Nomadland is based on, is like, I fucking hate this job, you know? And yet the scenes inside the fulfillment center are very neutral. You know, one wouldn't say that it's necessarily, you know, PR for Amazon, but there is a decided neutrality to it that the filmmakers have addressed.
I don't know, that training session seemed pretty upbeat and positive, and you know, what's the best way
and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. No, exactly. That's like one of our guests and friend of the show, Eileen Jones. That was her big critique about, especially the Amazon part of it. And okay, that's like what it took to get them to be allowed to be to film in there. And it's not quite the critique that they deserve, but I don't think it lets them off the hook completely, type of thing.
Yeah, I agree. For me, it's something that it makes the film interesting to talk about and to consider, what it wants to do, what it's trying to do, as it takes on, it has this background of these systemic forces that basically drive every character. And then to enter the belly of the beast, is an interesting choice, like, artistically.
That part of it is like, Amazon is like a huge target, and of course, like, they have their tendrils and fucking everything, servers, just like an insane number of lobbyists, they're sort of like in every sort of county, and have like outsized control and all those things. So obviously, like, it is a huge target, but moreover, like the movie has this idea of this like sort of unseen, force, and these sort of like, this dispersed and sort of, directionless, violence being, taken up by the land and the people and everything else.
Yeah. And to get, again, studies in contrast, the contrast between the fulfillment center and its inhuman scale, with the gypsum mine that she wanders through at the end, which is a human scale. It looks like a place people worked and had relationships that endured and, made decisions and had agency, even if they were sort of on the clock and exploited by the management. Like there's just this kind of like worn in, lived in human quality, and in contrast with the expanse that stretches, to the vanishing point of the frame.
And I think that, like, the film sort of creates this like atmosphere that is very unnatural inside of the Amazon factory that maybe like they couldn't show more explicitly in some other aspects, perhaps because of the way that they got the permission to shoot in there. But there is this like unnatural like amount of sort of silence in there, which like, I don't know, the last time you were in a factory, I've never been in something that big, but like it's never fucking quiet. It's like so loud all the time.
It's smooth. That's
and there it's like
smoothness,
and like, and that gives it this like the like the haunted hospital atmosphere there. You know what I mean? It's like this very like unnaturally silent and creepy and
yeah.
It's this thing like hanging over everybody.
Yeah, it does have for me on the positive side, one thing that I really liked about that Amazon scene is it featured one of my favorite Chloé Zhao tropes, which is people explaining their tattoos.
Yeah.
She does it in every film, and she's so good at it. She finds like really great tattoos and people who explain them in really interesting ways. And, in this case, it's the Morrissey and Smith's lyrics the woman has. And it happens in The Rider with the Lane tattoo on the back. It happens with the Travis 7.
Yeah.
I love that. She's great at that. Keep that up. A couple of other things while we're talking about corporate America in this film. Another sort of standout moment was when there's a montage in the film of Frances McDormand walking around, sort of, I think it's in the Wall Drug sequence,
Mm-hmm.
and she's in that interesting town. It's kind of like a touristy town, but she
Yeah,
enters.
I've been there, yeah.
Yeah.
By South Dakota, yeah. By Mount Rushmore, I meant to say, yeah.
Right. So she enters a movie theater, and what's on the marquee? The Avengers.
Yes.
And my question, I need to look at the timelines. Did she have her contract with Marvel's The Eternals?
I believe so, because like right after The Rider came out, I was like, ooh, what's she gonna do next? And it was like Marvel. I was like, no.
Yeah, and again, I think so. I find this really interesting because, and you know, this is sort of outside, I guess the text, or maybe it's not, because she put it in there, but this sort of like nod that, you know, has to be intentional. And for me, there is this haunted quality to it, because you know what happens to every talented director? They get sucked into the Marvel vacuum, you know, and I think it's hard to resist, of course, with, you know, the amount of money and prestige and security that will come along with that. And so I think there is this
freedom to do your own thing probably next too, you know, a little.
Sure, the Soderbergh, like, you know, one for you, one for me. One for
yeah,
you, one
exactly.
For me. You know, and yet, you know, it does have that poison chalice quality to it. And I think, you know, who knows, like maybe she's spoken about this or will, but to me, it was kind of a nod to that, of like what's coming next. Right. And yeah, the other point I wanted to make about this was like, for her as an artist, going back to the sort of outsider looking in thing, it's like this process of becoming the American filmmaker is getting like subsumed into the corporate content machine. You know, she's what more American thing can happen to you than just to get pulled in to the machine, you know? And
well, and it's also like, you know, this movie in particular, like, you know, okay, it's essentially only available on, you know, Hulu streaming. And what's crazy is like the second like the frame hits black and we're out of the movie, it like, you know, the frame just scoots over to the side, you know, and it's like, oh, do you want to watch a Seinfeld next, or do you want to watch you know, Top Chef or a Real Housewife? Like, what do you want to watch next? And it's like this like countdown, and while the like music's still playing, while the credits are still going, like, you know, and it's like it is definitely emblematic of where we are, like, you know, film wise and everything else. And, you know, just like that marquee, which is, you know, this is supposed to be, you know, 2011, and just like that marquee where it's like, you know, that one you know, the last picture show in this little town type of thing. It's like one of those things where I, you know, who knows if it even made it to 2019 to get shut down in 2020. It's like a theater like that, you know, places like that, like they've, you know, over that 10-year period, there's been like so much more hollowing out, and like that idea of like the financial crash that happened in 2008. I mean, fucking never recovered from, and like we're having to double down on now with like with COVID and everything else. Anyway.
Yeah, there's
on that depressing note.
Yeah, on that.
Yeah, I was gonna say we're coming up to the end here. No, let's find a better note to go out on.
Yes. Please God. Well, I mean, what's great is like that we watch much better movies than the last time we had you on.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, on the bright side,
however,
we got it. Yeah.
Thematically, they're very depressing. Yeah.
On the bright side, we didn't have to watch the Dune miniseries again.
Another order of punishment. Well, it is. Yeah, I mean, this we'll find a place of light to end on, but I think there's just so many great lines in this one from the non-professional actors. That there's a woman. And I think it's her only moment in the film where she tells Fern, "You're one of those lucky people from the USA," and just, you know, the kind of the irony of that statement, given where she's ended up, given where the United States is post Great Recession. You know, that to me was such a great moment that you know, I think also embodies what Fern feels is lost, or recognizes is all now a memory and haunted by, is just this way of life that has been taken away, the dispossession of it, you know?
Right. And then that like same theme being extended with her sister's friends at that barbecue or whatever, where it's like, yeah, we're just flipping houses now, and like, you know, we're making money for ourselves, and
they were coughing money at that point,
fucking up
her,
the real estate prices. You're welcome. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know that. Okay. Another thing I want to say is I was thinking about the kind of the system that Fern and I forget David Strathairn's character's name is, but
David.
David. Yeah. Dave. They have this orbit of affluence around them. You know, Fern's sister has this amazing house. David's son has this like incredible compound in Mendocino. It sounds like he had been a touring musician at some point and ends up with this like awesome cliffside house up in Mendocino. And so there is this sense of like way out if they opt for it, you know, if they were willing to eat their pride and
which David does.
David does, and she doesn't. There's that amazing scene with her sister, and her sister who that character and that performance I thought were fantastic. The sister is simultaneously such an asshole to her and so condescending and
but proud of her.
Dismissive, but also proud of her and self-reflective. You know, she's sort of like chastising her for choosing this life, and then the very next moment says like, you were able to see me before, you know, I could see myself. And I just feel like the writing and like the complexity of like her sister's not an asshole or supportive. She's somewhere in between, you know, from one statement to the next was great.
Well,
and yeah, go ahead.
The thing that like, you know, kind of struck me with that was like, you know, that their sibling relationship it's very similar to some of the other sibling relationships in these other movies, right? It's like, you know, if the Lily character was, you know, higher functioning, or you know, however you say that, she could have been the Fern character, where it's like, you know, there's this drive that sort of can't be reasoned with type of thing, and you know, the expression of love to try and like control her, or like say, hey, why don't you do this, why don't you do that, you know, that then gets totally rejected. But you know, the you know, and perhaps it's like, you know, you can't find the sister that is Fern's sister, I can't remember her name, she can't find the right language to sort of communicate to Fern, you know, how much she sort of cares about her and like and wants to do these things for her benefit and whatever. But to Fern, she just feels attacked, and you know, it's like immediately rejecting it. But it has this thing where it's like, also as so what I mean is like in the other two films, like the sibling relationships were so tight, and in this one, it's similar, but if they were butting heads more than they do, like if you know, Brady wasn't the sort of you know, horse whisperer sort of empath that he is, you know, perhaps the relationship would be more like Fern and her sister.
Yeah. One of the things that brings Fern into contact with her sister is the financial need. She's got to pay for her van. And I think just getting back to my earlier point, what stands out in this film is, you know, how white it is. And most of these nomads we see are white people. There's one black woman around the campfire telling her story. But I think thinking about the 20th century and the affluence and who that affluence was for, and, you know, like, again, getting back to this like orbit of support that's out there because of their class and race and all of these things, like both David and Fern have that option that doesn't feel like an option so much to Fern. You know, it's almost as though like she's just incapable of making that choice.
Well, I mean, she clearly is, because it is incapable, because she's, you know, she had that sort of lifeline in both those ways, but
right.
like can't do it.
But her real lifeline back to the real world was her husband, right? That was gone, and now she didn't have him to go back to, or that anchor. So
Right. Yeah. The emotional lifeline is.
And David
is the
wasn't
thing
going
for
to be
her.
that replacement. I think she decided that, or you felt like he wanted to be, but did not last.
Yeah. And then where does this film end up? Back where it started. It has that nice circular structure, roundabout sort of circle, as she kind of circles the West. And as I take a detour here, thinking about how her sister at that barbecue, somebody's like, I like to think of them as like pioneers, except the difference is like, the pioneers, the colonizers who dominated the continent, going from east to west, manifest destiny, this sense of like inexhaustible resources, land, and now the pioneering that's happening is this kind of like turn back in because everything's exhausted. And
I mean, it's pioneering without the sort of backing of the U.S. military to kick people off their land and everything else, right?
Right. Well, we have to find the moment of light.
Yeah, we should probably go on a better note again.
Yeah, where do we go out?
We did it again.
Moments of beauty. I mean, I think just finding just moments of beauty to linger on, I think, is another thing that I love so much, and why for me it's such a shame that she's going to direct a Marvel movie next. For example,
this might be the best Marvel movie you guys have ever seen. I just want to, before we step all over this one, this might turn some, this might be a total change of Marvel films,
It signals a new era.
Yeah.
Well, so anyway, I think I love the scene where she runs back into that drifter kid from Wisconsin.
Yes,
and
the lighter kid.
Right.
She recites the Shakespeare sonnet.
So long lives this, and this gives life to thee.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And again, he's such a great actor for somebody, they had just found out there. But I think those moments where the literal poetry and the cinematic poetry come together, and you get to just indulge in like the moment itself, is something that feels to me increasingly rare in films these days. And maybe you're right. Maybe in the Eternals we'll have the rubber suited. I have no idea what this film's about, but maybe she will bring that
sort
in
of magic, and there's going to be things coming from the sky, and then you break the staff and the things go away from the sky.
There you go.
Something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
That's Raiders of the Lost Ark, Jeremy.
Oh yeah. I don't know. I mean, and the thing is, like, I mean, it's like the one for me, one for them type of scenario. Let's hope there is another one for me after that. Because as these three movies sort of proved, her ability to create these stories from people who are sort of underknown, or just like not either celebrated or explored in our popular culture. She has this great way of like being able to dive into those things and find very sort of poignant and personal ways to tell those stories. It's not just, again, like the exploiting the poverty porn or judging or petri dishing them in a way, but like fully embodying their story.
Yeah, and right, and none of them feel like the definitive statement on these cultures and communities, which I love.
Totally.
It's like she's passing through and she's capturing some truth, but there's so much more to be mined. And I wouldn't mind watching another movie about Nomad. It's like, this isn't the only movie that needs to be about them. This isn't the only movie about a Pine Ridge reservation.
The Broncos, or exactly. Like actually, that's a good point too, because both Ryder and Songs, my brother taught me, were at the same reservation, right? But like they feel so different. They feel like they're in totally different locations. Like it's completely different, sort of characters and subcultures. I mean, in what's kind of interesting is that, like, I think the way she got into it is an interesting case as well. You know, like, so obviously she, you know, learned about the Brady and his family and friends while shooting Songs My Brothers Taught Me, but like the way she got out to do that one in the Badlands in the first place was that, like, you know, well, she was, you know, born and raised in Beijing, and then, like, you know, went to school in New York and
London,
you know,
too.
And yeah, and like, so it's all these, like, you know, giant cities.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently the way she was describing it was like in China, there's this sort of, like, you know, almost the way we have Western mythology in the US. They have that about sort of the you know, plains of Mongolia, and was thinking that this landscape wise would be sort of something similar, and, you know, kind of just went out there to, like, to find out what kind of, like, you know, story she could find, and, like, ended up, you know, kind of creating her own sort of genre by doing that.
Yeah, she creates a little cinematic universe of her own, and
yeah.
there was one Easter egg I liked in Nomadland. The singer-songwriter Cat Clifford appears, and he is one of Brady's friends in the guy who plays guitar.
Yeah.
The nicer of the friends, you know, the more sympathetic
The one that actually, didn't force him back onto a horse. Yeah.
There's a quick scene of him hanging around a pickup truck strumming his guitar, and you like to think, like, oh, maybe he's like, that's him and he's hanging out.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what she does next. I mean, not including Eternal. I hope when she goes back to these films, I'm really interested to see what the next subject's going to be. Or if she extends these, like you said. Dan, thank you so much for joining us again. This was great. Again, movies that were a lot easier to watch than the Dune films. But this was really exciting talking about these with you, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what Chloé Zhao has in store for us moving forward. So thanks for joining.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah,
definitely. All right. Next week, we have a very special show and a very special guest joining us. My instructor, Bruce, from college. He was my script writing teacher. He will be joining us for a very cool block that is more or less the origins of James Bond in cinema. Very, very interesting. The three films that we'll be talking about are 1942's Casablanca, 1955's The Cockleshell Heroes, one I've never heard of, so very excited about that, and 1959's North by Northwest. So that should be a great block. Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure to subscribe and follow us on all the podcasts and social platforms at the Grindhouse Institute. And if you really want to give us a boost, check us out on Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It helps us to get noticed. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll be back next week.
We'll see you down the road.
Good night, son. See you in the morning.
I'll take care of you, Lil.
I'll take care of you, too.